Chapter 2 is titled My Selfie Myself. Starts on 119, Identity and Ideology and the New Millennium. The new millennium has been a time when questions about human identity have become especially prominent, as racial, sexual, gender, class, and religious identities have all played major roles in America's political life and pop culture. So essentially, this section of the book asks the question, who are you? What makes you you? And I talked about the mythology in the introduction lecture a little bit, but again, our prized mythology is something that we get growing up, right? It's something that completes our identity. It's synonymous with value systems, synonymous with ideology. Wherever you have developed those are the components of your mythology, right? Political affiliation, religious affiliation, family background, the values that were emphasized in your household when you were growing up, your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, all of that influences your mythology. Traditionally, your family, your society, and your religion play the most prominent role in shaping your identity. But in an entertainment culture like ours, popular culture increasingly performs this task as well. Particularly if you're tied into the internet, TV, cable, radio, if you still listen to the radio. So here are a few examples of what can help create our mythology. A gender code is one of them. It's a culturally constructed system that prescribes the appropriate roles and behaviors for men and women in society. So if you're female and you've ever been told that you're a tomboy or that's not very ladylike, that's some of the language that's used to tell you basically you're out of your lane. You're not acting like a traditional woman should, and you need to get back in your lane. If you're a man and someone has called you some sort of epithet, to sort of emasculize you, whether they've told you that, they question your sexual orientation because of the way that you act or dress or speak, right? You're not masculine enough and you need to get back in your lane. Because anything outside of the binary makes people uncomfortable, because our society has created a system where there are two genders only, which isn't true. We teach an entirely different course on how there isn't just two genders. In fact, Kate Bornstein would tell you that there are many genders in the world as there are people. Whether or not you agree with that or not is up to you. But just to be clear, biological sex does not equal gender. Biological sex, there are three options: male, female, intersex. Okay, we're all assigned one at birth. No matter what. Gender is how we identify with ourselves. So our body parts, what we're born with, does not equal gender. Okay, it gives you several examples here of how to stay in your lane, right? Boys don't cry, girls wear makeup. Boys are aggressive, girls are passive. Boys play sports, girls are cheerleaders. Sorry, girls, if you believe that cheerleading is a sport. Apparently the book does not. Men go out to work, women stay home and raise children. Okay, the list is long. If you're non-binary, if you're transsexual, if you are transgendered. Transvestite's an old term, we shouldn't use it anymore, okay? Because it's been used in a derogatory way. Transgender, transsexual, non-binary, all different ways that biological and sexual identity sort of intersect to create gender identity. This section, I think, gives you some more examples of, it talks about Modern Family. And, in the introduction, we talked about, we talked about Leave It to Beaver, right? Modern Family is very different when looking at Leave It to Beaver, and that's because our society has changed, right? What we watch, what we listen to is all different because our society has changed. Just to give you another example that probably is not in this book, I grew up listening to gangster rap, right? Like Nas, Jay-Z, Pac, Biggie, 50 Cent when he was relevant, right? And the rap that was created in the early 90s is vastly different than the rap that's created today. Why? Because we've changed. They've changed. We've changed. Even the Jay-Z that's still rapping today, Kanye that was then, Kanye that's now, it's different, right? And so there's a connotative value to that. There are reasons why that's occurred. There are reasons why Modern Family exists and Leave It to Beaver doesn't, right, anymore. It talks about hypermasculinity, hyperfemininity, which we've sort of talked about a little bit in a previous lecture. And then it talks about feminism, the race for space. Great Divide again jumps into a social class, which I talked about in the previous lecture, which I probably don't need to harp on again. But this chapter, from chapter 1, right, we talked about all those contradictions in chapter 1. Chapter 2 is getting specific about those contradictions, right? So we're talking about gender. We're talking about feminism, right? We talked about how, sexualization for commodification was okay, right? So that's what post-feminist or third wave, the heading is talking about here. The space for race talks about racial issues, inadequacies that we have with minority groups right now. The Great Divide talks about social class. Generation X. The X has sort of been placed here in respect to gender identity. The letter X has been adopted to take place of the masculine and feminine vowel endings that are prevalent in Spanish nouns. So this has to deal with gender identity, possibly sexual orientation, but a whole group of people who are sort of challenging those gender norms and affiliations, like Latina, Latino, you see Latinx. This is why, and this is on page, starts on 124, but it carries over onto 126. And then, of course, they tell you to be whoever you want to be here. And the fact that you can be whoever you want to be, but you need to be cognizant of the fact that there is a whole system in place to sort of usurp your identity. You are a commodity for sale, right? So your identity is a commodity that is being bought, traded on the open market daily, specifically if you're on social media. And these are all signifiers. So we're going to be looking at some readings that cover all of these topics in chapter 2. So this chapter may start to make you feel a little uncomfortable. We're going to talk about the science of shopping. We're going to talk about witch people, shamed by 1,000 looks. Yeah, as we get into politics of the hoodie, your cultural attire, we're moving in to some space where you're going to have to set your cultural mythology aside in order to sort of adequately understand how these contradictions exist. Okay, so keep that in mind as we move forward. Science of shopping is pretty safe, but once we get into witch people, shamed by 1,000 looks, you're going to start to have to examine things like race, economic inequality, gender inequality as well, cultural appropriation, and also the politics of the hoodie talks about the appropriation of the hoodie in terms of rap, in terms of the criminal class, in terms of skateboarders, graffiti artists, and of course, the killing death of Trayvon Martin. So, brace yourself.